There are some new images and details for Dune Part 2 thanks to a recently published article by Empire magazine here in the UK. We got an interview with director Denis Villeneuve, cinematographer Greg Fraser, and production designer Patrice Vermette, where they talked about delivering on the promise of Part 1, the film being a war movie, new details about added characters, the potential of a third film with Dune Messiah, and much more surrounding the filmmaking process. This article was released over a week ago, but due to me being on holiday for 2 weeks, I wasn't able to cover it at that time. But now that I'm back, I thought I would go into that article, especially with us now having to wait a little bit longer to see the film after the recent delay. So in this video, I'm going to be discussing the new images and details shared, breaking down all the latest info. Before I get into it though, if you want to keep up to date on any of my content surrounding Dune Part 2 and beyond, then don't forget to support this upload by giving it a like rating, subscribing to the channel, and turning on your notifications. But without further ado, let's discuss the new images and details for Dune Part 2. So the new edition of Empire magazine has provided us with new images and interviews for Denis Villeneuve's highly anticipated film. The new article details a world-exclusive dive into Dune Part 2 with the director and crew. The issue has 3 front covers, with the first showing off the fighters, including Timothée Chalamet's Paul Atreides, Zendaya's Chani, Javier Bardem's Stilgar, Rebecca Ferguson's Lady Jessica, and Josh Brolin's Gurney Halleck. The second cover is for The Oppressors, which includes Austin Butler's Fade Rother, Dave Bautista's Raban, Stellan Skarsgård's Baron Harkonnen, Leia Sedu's Lady Margot Femring, and Florence Pugh's Princess Irulan. And the subscriber cover features a beautiful piece of Arrakis artwork, reminiscent of the one for Empire's Part 1 cover, with alignments of sand and stars. Inside the article, there's also new images featured, which includes one of Fade Rother getting close to Margot Femring, a close-up of Chani, artwork for what appears to be the sandworms storming the gates of Arrakis, the entrance to the Fremen Siege Tabur, Paul in the desert, and 2 shots of Denis Villeneuve on location with both cinematographer Greg Fraser and production designer Patrice Vermette. I will show these images on screen again throughout the video with the descriptions of the interviews that take place. But now that the intro is out the way, let's get into the extended details and all of the most interesting things that were mentioned in this new article. To begin with, Denis Villeneuve discussed his initial thoughts on coming back to the desert to film Part 2 of his planned Dune universe. In mentioning the many hours that he and his production crew were out in the desert, he said, "For my mise-en-scène, I'll want a particular shaped dune. But Greg Fraser, on the other hand, will need that same shape to be in a specific light." So production designer Patrice Vermette spent weeks and weeks casting sand dunes in the desert. We looked like madmen. We didn't repeat a single location. We found completely fresh spots to tell our story this time around. Months later, during the editing, sound and VFX process, Villeneuve then discussed his joy for getting to make a second part and delivering on the promise of Part 1. He said, "The movie is alive. Part 1 was like the promise of something, but Part 2 delivers on that. I'm exhausted but a happy director. The first movie was more contemplative, a young man discovering a world. Here, it's a war movie. And at the very core is a love story between Paul and Chani. How Paul will gain her trust, how she will open her heart to him, and how they will find a way to free Chani's world from the Harkonnen grip. It's a much more emotional movie. I remember when I was doing Part 1, I kept saying to Timothy, no, you're just Paul, because he was reaching for Muad'Dib. He was looking forward to becoming that hero, and I was pushing the brakes. And this, of course, was Denis hinting at the darker future of that character. He continued by saying, Paul has the power to change things, but he knows that if he does so, it will create an astronomical amount of violence and he will become a kind of dictator. He's trying to find a way to avoid that ominous future. That's the burden upon his shoulders. He then started to go a little more into some of the new characters joining his universe, and particularly those that are going to have a huge influence in the plot of Part 2, or those whose presence you could feel in Part 1 regardless of them not being seen. He first mentioned Christopher Walken's Emperor and how that casting came about. He said, "When they asked me who I saw as the Emperor, spontaneously I said to the studio, I see Christopher Walken. He's a force. There's something about the man that commands respect. The way he acts, it's explosive, it's absolutely unpredictable, poetic, and powerful. When he came on set, I was frightened." Then he mentioned the Emperor's daughter, Princess Irulan, and how he and Florence Pugh took on that character. "I had to make sure we understand that at the end of the day, Irulan is a Bene Gesserit more than anything else. She's not an instrument of the Imperials, she's a part of the bigger plan." Moving on to the Harkonnens, we also did get a brief description from Denis on the anticipated appearance of Fade Rotha, played by Austin Butler. He said, "Austin brought something that is a cross between a psychopath killer, an Olympic swordmaster, a snake, and Mick Jagger. He has tremendous sex appeal and charisma and madness, it's really out there." And the other new character that was only briefly touched upon was Léa Seydoux' Margot Fenring, who Denis is clearly trying to keep at bay, surrounding the greater importance of her and the Bene Gesserit's role in the overall story. He said, "I don't want to talk too much about Lady Fenring, she's part of the spiderweb of the Bene Gesserit, but I want to keep the mystery around her. My version of Dune is different because the thing that really seduced me about the book was the Bene Gesserit. My adaptation is more oriented towards their impact, they are the puppet masters of the universe." Characters weren't the only thing he discussed though, because he also talked about visiting new worlds that we've only briefly seen in Part 1, and also particular scenes that fans of Dune will be very excited to hear about. Starting with the additional worlds of Part 2, while we will be visiting planets like Kytane, the home of Christopher Walken's Emperor, we will also be getting a greater look at Gedi Prime and the fighting pits there. On Gedi Prime, Patrice Vermette said, "It's a fake plastic world influenced by the aesthetic of septic tanks. They implement their force upon the Fremen by spreading their aesthetics and their culture just like a cancer." And coming to the mentioned scenes, one is a moment from the novel that didn't make it the first time around, and while Dune fans were sad to miss it, Villeneuve was able to include it in Part 2. This was the Gurney Halleck baliset scene where the character would play an unusual instrument. The director confirmed that the baliset is included by saying, "The Gurney song survived Part 2. It became a weird priority for me, but Josh Brolin is a poet and we played it together. It was awesome." On top of this, cinematographer Greg Fraser also talked about filming one of the hardest aspects of Part 2 with taking on much more sandworm action. This included shooting particular scenes with a large focus on realism, something that the first film also did well in the few scenes we got with the worms. Fraser said, "Just because there are no real sandworms, it doesn't mean we're going to go onto a soundstage. We were outside shooting sandworms in the real wind and real dust. Just because you don't have one small element doesn't mean you throw away the entire concept of being honest and real. You know what you get when you take a big blue screen out to the desert. You get a big blue bounce. But blue doesn't even exist on Arrakis. It was a different kettle of fish when it comes to look and feel. Dune has a lot more tangibility to it. And that's not to dismiss anything from Star Wars, but the reality was we needed to be able to taste the spice on the screen." Coming back to Denis, he ended his Empire interview by leaving us with some excitement for a potential third Dune film with an adaptation of Dune Messiah. Of course, Frank Herbert continued the Arrakis story with many novels before his son took over to continue it himself. And with rumours pointing towards Denis making his take on Dune a trilogy, Messiah would be the perfect endpoint to wrap up the story of Paul Atreides. In the article, he said, "When Herbert wrote the first Dune, I think he was destabilised by how people reacted to it. That's why he wrote Dune Messiah, because Messiah was written in reaction to the fact that people perceived Paul Atreides as a hero, which is not what he wanted to do. My adaptation of Dune is closer to his idea that it's actually a warning. So if I succeed in making a trilogy, that would be the dream. After that, the books become more esoteric. What I will say surrounding a third film is that there are words on paper." So according to Denis, the plan is there for that third Dune film, and if you remember from a while back, he did say that there may be a bit of a wait between part 2 and Messiah because he would need to wait for the actors to age up to tell the end of his adaptation. On top of this, the article does remind us that he wants to do multiple projects over the coming years, including his TV series The Sun with Jake Gyllenhaal and Jonathan Nolan, an adaptation of Arthur C. Clarke's Rendezvous with Rama, and a retelling of Cleopatra. So we'd likely expect there to be at least a project or two, which is a few years, between Dune Part 2 and Dune Messiah. Also, with Part 2 now being delayed until March of 2024, it does mean that we have to wait a little bit longer just to see the next part. But as this article does touch on, the effort that's being taken both behind and in front of the camera will hopefully all be worth it, and overall, I can't wait to see the rest of Herbert's original novel translated to the big screen. I guess we'll soon find out if Denis has delivered on all that was set up, and based on what was said here, it does sound very promising. But they were the main images and details released from the new Empire edition of Denis Villeneuve's Dune Part 2. I'm interested to hear what you guys think towards the new images and details discussed, alongside what personally excites you the most about Villeneuve's upcoming film. So let me know down below in the comment section. For much more videos and news on Denis Villeneuve's Dune universe, then subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications. Also, if you enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like rating and follow me on social media via the links in the description. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I've been Cortex, and as always, make some noise.